Hello, it's Velma. Today's video is going to be a hopefully fairly short review of The Three Things About Elsie by Joanna Cannon. Now, in true Velma style, I don't have a copy of the book with me because I've already passed it on to my sister, so I'll try and put a picture up here so you know what I'm on about. I'm sure most of you will have heard of this book anyway, since it is part of the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. It's received, I would say, a fairly lacklustre range of reviews from what I can see, and some people have reacted to its inclusion on the long list with fairly scathing and sometimes snobby remarks. So, although I wasn't initially drawn to read it, I feel like I should read it and hopefully enjoy it with a view to balancing the scales a little bit. And I think I can. Last year I read The Trouble with Goats and Sheep, which was Joanna Cannon's debut novel, and I didn't seem to love it quite as much as other people. It was, I would say, fairly universally well received on BookTube, Goodreads and elsewhere, and although I really enjoyed the writing and the characterisation, I felt that it was a little bit drawn out and slow in parts to its detriment, but I know that I was very much the minority in that. Now, slow pacing is a criticism I've seen levied at Three Things About Elsie, but although it is quite a slow paced book, I'm okay with that. I'm going to explain why. Firstly, there are a lot of parallels between The Trouble in Goats and Sheep and Three Things About Elsie. You've got a central narrator who is utterly charming, not always altogether reliable, then a wider kind of cast of characters who are varying in their success, I would say, and a very cosy, working class British background and tone to the whole thing. Now, if there was a Venn diagram of Joanna Cannon's perfect readership or demographic, then I suspect I'm bang in the middle, being somewhat middle-aged, British and working class. And there was a lot in this book that I found to love. Florence is an irascible heroine. She's difficult, she's prickly and she's stubborn. She doesn't get on with the other residents in the sheltered accommodation where she lives. She hasn't really got time for nonsense. But those people who get to know Florence well see that she's also an incredibly kind woman. And I think as a character she's really successful because she is rounded. She's not simple. And she is somebody that as readers you get totally behind and you believe in her. Now, Florence is in the early stages of dementia, and this reminded me a lot of Elizabeth is Missing, which is a book I read a year ago, Emma Healy, I want to say, a couple of years ago, and I absolutely loved, because it means that her memory is kind of shifting, and that's what gives the narration that unreliable tone. But the solidity of Florence's character means that you're absolutely with her all the way. Florence is accompanied at all times by her friend Elsie, and we do find out three things about Elsie, the third one of which is not revealed until the final pages of the book. But by then, I'm pretty sure it is not supposed to be a surprise. I'm pretty sure. It's difficult to say too much without giving it away, but I really think Joanna Cannon has got more respect for her readers than to think that we wouldn't have guessed by the last page what was going on. There are still mysteries and things which slowly unfold here with Florence's memories, but they're much more to do with the overall story arc than any kind of reveal. Now, again, without giving too much away, this central conceit has got a lot in common with other books that I've read, most notably recently Eleanor Oliphant, which is also on the long list. But I think it's kind of so heavy-handed here that I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be along for the ride. If you've read it, tell me underneath. Do you think the same? We're supposed to know, aren't we? So, as many of you will know, this book opens with Florence on the floor of the sheltered accommodation where she lives, having suffered a fall. And while she waits for assistance to come, she's left with lots of time and opportunity to reflect back on what's been happening over previous months. And then that leads her to thinking of the distant past and the mystery that slowly becomes solved over the course of the book. So, a man has recently moved into the accommodation, and Florence knows him as Ronnie Butler. He's using a different name now, but he's altogether a nasty piece of work, although she can't remember why. But with the help of her friend Elsie and Jack, who's another resident at the home, she starts to kind of unpick the past. This is an incredibly British book. Now, I know that we all read to expand our horizons, don't we? So, you know, we like to read about other cultures and so on and so forth. But I can't imagine that anybody could enjoy this book quite as much as a British reader. It's almost sitcom in feel. It reminded me of, if you ever watched Dinner Ladies, the Victoria Wood sitcom, which was a huge hit back in the 90s. It's got that pathos. You know, it's a very funny book. There's some really great one-liners, but there's also ultimately a very tragic undertone, and I think it's incredibly British to set those things against each other in such a successful way. So one of the main criticisms of the book has been its pacing, but perhaps I was already acclimatised to that after Goats and Sheep, so I was expecting it to be a slow read. And this felt to me like a rainy bank holiday Monday where you sat on the settee watching TV and time just becomes this elastic thing that drags on and on forever. And I didn't mind at all just hanging out with the characters in this book and seeing where it took us. Now, some of the characters are more successful than others. So, like Goats and Sheep, we've got an ensemble cast here. And there were a lot of scenes with the caretaker of the residential home and the manager that felt a bit filler. And those characters didn't come alive to me as much as Florence and her immediate circle. But I still didn't mind just spending time with them whilst finding out what would ultimately happen. Whereas I was a bit cross with Goats and Sheep for what I felt was wasting my time. This book absolutely made reparations for me. I finally get Joanna Cannon's treatment of time. I finally get why the books are so slow. When I think of the central characters in both of them, in Goats and Sheep you have these young girls, and if you remember being 11 or 12, the summer holidays felt like they lasted forever. You know, when you're young, a day feels like a week and you can never ever see the end. And then you've got Florence at the other end of her life, you know, who's in this place, she's not really particularly happy, and she'll describe things like those interminable games of bingo and residents sat in the lounges in front of televisions in those high wing-back chairs, kind of God's waiting room. Time seemed to sort of slow down at either end of our lives. Ultimately, Joanna Cannon writes fantastic 350-page books in 500 pages, but I'm on board with that now, I think. I've seen a lot of booktubers say they want to read this as part of the long list, but they're not particularly looking forward to it. I think they anticipate it's going to be over saccharine or quite twee, and perhaps they're right to have reservations. Like I say, this does appeal to a certain part of the British psyche, I think, and it's not for everyone. But it was for me. I really enjoyed it. If Goodreads, you know, is your thing, then I would say I gave this 4 stars, whereas I gave Goats and Sheep 3 stars. So I did think this was a better book, although I know I'm in the minority there. Have you read 3 Things About Elsie? Did you enjoy it? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.